Our next session is with a team of experts in the field of child sexual exploitation. Now, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children is the nation's comprehensive reporting center for all issues related to the prevention and recovery of children victimization. NCMEC, or the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, was founded by John and Reve Walsh and other children advocates to help find missing children, reduce child sexual exploitation, and prevent child victimization. For nearly 40 years, NCMEC has been working with families, victims, private industry, law enforcement, and the public to make a difference. We are excited to be able to welcome to the stage CEO Michelle DeLaune, Exploited Children Division Director Lauren Coffren, and Team HOPE member Nicole. Thank you so much. Welcome.
Thank you, thank you. Thank you so much for the kind introduction, and thank you to Sam and Casey Malouf for the vision to bring so many talented and diverse professionals and survivors together to have these really important conversations regarding child sexual exploitation. This is our first summit attending with the Malouf Foundation, and I know just between us and our conversations that we've been having how much we've learned too. So this is a wonderful opportunity. And to the Malouf Foundation conference organizers, you make everything look really easy when we know it is not. So thank you for that also. My name, as mentioned, is Michelle DeLaune. I'm the CEO and president of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Our topic today is about the realities, the revictimization, and the response to child sexual exploitation imagery. I'd like to just let my co-panelists and my colleagues and my friends introduce themselves. I'll be talking about the realities in terms of the scope of the issue. With child sexual exploitation, it takes many, many different forms. We've heard today from abduction victims, from trafficking victims. One of the area that we're going to be talking about is the imagery. Children who are being sexually exploited, children who are being sexually abused, and individuals who not only add insult to injury by actually photographing and memorializing the abuse, and some of that also going online. It is a large scope of an issue that we're going to talk about, but there's also a lot of hope in terms of a lot of the public-private partnerships that have made a difference in combating this problem, and also just sharing many of the resources that are available to all of you, and certainly to everybody listening online.
My name is Nicole, and I am the mother of a child sexual exploitation survivor. Their abuse was recorded and widely distributed on a variety of online platforms, including social media and the internet and the dark web. And I will be talking to you about the revictimization aspect and Team HOPE, which is part of the National Center, and the services that we offer to families who are going through this.
Hi all, I'm Lauren Coffren. I'm a director at the National Center. And my work in the Exploited Children Division is really to engage with survivors, start being able to determine where are the gaps in the process, where are there places to improve the response, and then working together with survivors, craft the right resources that are needed to target the specific population. So the goal is that as we cover a little bit of the heavy, we end up on a hopefully more hopeful tone. So let's see if we can accomplish that by the end of this.
Stay with us. So just a little bit about our organization. We were founded 38 years ago. As Clay mentioned, John and Reve Walsh, whose son Adam was abducted and murdered. They channeled their grief into creating an organization that would be there for families and for children and for law enforcement and the professionals that serve children to help future situations like that not be as bleak. Our organization's been in existence now for 38 years. We do a host of responses to crimes against children, certainly finding missing children. Amber alerts that are coming out to your phone are coming from us. We also are building prevention and education material based on real-world examples of how children are being exploited or abducted. And here, for the child sexual exploitation, we have a very unique lens of this in the sense of several programs that we operate on child sexual exploitation. And when we're using the phrase child sexual abuse material, it is worth really hearkening back to what we've heard multiple times today, in particular from Dr. Bailey, about words matter. Words do matter when we're talking about the images and videos that have been produced. The term that's in a lot of legislation, certainly being used in the media, is child pornography. And it is a misnomer. There's nothing pornographic. Pornography implies some sort of consent, some sort of participation. When you read the term child pornography, please know what we're talking about and what the individuals and professionals who are working in this space. It is child sexual abuse material. It is a child who's being sexually exploited. The numbers, as you're going to hear today as we speak, the numbers, I think, can somewhat numb us and become overwhelming and make it difficult, A, to think about what sort of response we might have and how can we even do anything about this. But B, it also, I think, tends to dehumanize the fact that behind every single image, there's a child. And there's a child who has been exploited, who has been abused. And it is upon all of us to A, understand that, B, to use the right words, because our survivors are reading the news also and reading the news reports and the media. And until we really put the word sexual abuse back into that term, it is hard, I think, for people to understand what it is we're talking about. So we do have a unique perspective in this area due to the fact that we also are statutorily authorized to work with law enforcement with child sexual abuse material for two purposes. One, to aid in the identification of individuals who are trading and in exploiting children, but B, part of what we're going to be talking about, again, back to the people, back to the human side of this, is also to identify where the children are who are in these images. As everyone knows, the internet has no boundaries. There could be an individual arrested here in Utah or any state in America whose computer has a photograph or a video of a child in Germany or a child in Australia. And what we're working as a global community in the victim identification world is to make sure, regardless of where a child is located, that we have a safeguard, we have a net behind them, and we have law enforcement and trained professionals ready to help serve that child and their family. The perspective of where we're coming from as we talk about the realities of child sexual abuse material is staggering, and this goes back to the numbers being very high. These are simply reported images to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children of child sexual exploitation, child sexual abuse. We've analyzed more than 650 million images and videos. And our goal there is certainly to learn the scope of the problem, to find the individuals who are trading this material, but most importantly, to find the children who are actively being abused, to save them and provide the information to law enforcement to help them from that abusive situation. Because there are many children who are suffering abuse right now who doesn't know that anybody is looking for them. And again, because of the scope and the lack of geographic boundaries on the internet, we're really very much looking at where on earth were these images and videos produced. The 650 million, to give you a little context of where those images come from, those are a combination of reports that come in from US electronic service providers, social platform networks, online websites, any tech company that's providing a service in the United States. If they become aware of child sexual abuse material, they're required by law to report it to NCMEC, and we make it available to law enforcement wherever they are in the world in order to respond to that crime. In addition, when law enforcement in the United States arrests an individual or seize a computer that has child sexual abuse material, they will work with us, so we do the analysis and review it for two purposes. One, to be able to tell them which children, which images contain children who are no longer in an abusive situation, and which images contain children or videos, or images or videos, of children that may actively be abused. We're using a lot of technology, we're using AI, machine learning in the background to pull out, as you can imagine, 650 million images. That's like the needle in the haystack that everybody talks about, but in our case, the needles are children. And it's very important to be able to use technology to be able to detect when children are still actively being abused. One of the trends that we've been detecting over the last few years is the massive spike in videos and video imagery of child sexual abuse material. Back in the day, even just 5 years ago, it was harder. Phones had a lot less storage in order to really produce this high quality video content. that's trading online. Add that to the fact you have a lot of high-speed broadband access. People are easily able to create material and trade material with ease online. So last year, in just 1 year, we saw a 41% increase and a 42% increase in the number of child sexual abuse images, videos that were being distributed. It is a very difficult experience to listen to the videos. It's hard to look at the imagery. It's worse to listen to the videos. But I know that we all kind of remind ourselves, everybody has their personal motivation for why we continue to do the work we do. And one of the things we've always talked about is the fact that we might be among the only people looking at those images and videos who actually care about the child. And that is really what drives us forward for victim identification. And what we've also learned with this role is who are the children? And in many cases, most cases, these are not missing children. These are children who are being sexually abused by somebody that they know, somebody in a position of trust. Something else to consider with child sexual abuse material, it's a reflection of child sexual abuse. That this isn't a digital crime, per se. This isn't something that just happens online. This is happening in basements and living rooms around the world, and then it's being shared online with like-minded individuals. And in our cases of children that we know law enforcement have identified around the world, 64% of the children depicted in the images are girls, and 36% are boys. 8% of the victims depicted in these images who have been identified are infants and toddlers, so under the age of 3. We have 59% are prepubescent, probably under the age of about 10 or 11, and 33% of our identified children are pubescent adolescents. I believe that number is much larger. However, it becomes more difficult to ascertain age from an image as the children get older. So that's a little snapshot of who we're talking about when we're talking about child sexual abuse material, and also who are the producers of this material. If you look at the chart there, starting at about noon, going till about 7, you'll see parents and guardians, other family members, babysitters, mentors, coaches, relatives, somebody who has that child, somebody the child should be able to trust, somebody who is in a circle of trust to that child. Again, going back to this digital representation is, in fact, child sexual abuse material becoming digital. As you go continuing along from probably the 7 to 9 o'clock, 7 to 10 o'clock on that chart, it's another trend that we're seeing that's very disturbing, and I think, Lauren, you might be talking a little bit about this, would be children who are taking sexually explicit images of themselves upon the request of somebody they're talking to online, almost always somebody who is not who they say they are, and then the child sends that material to them and then immediately becomes vulnerable and becomes a victim of blackmail or extortion, asking them for money, asking them for gift cards, asking them for more imagery. We're dealing with children who don't know how to find their way out of this situation. In self-production, we also all hear about the cases of the children who may produce images and then it goes around in a school or in a community. And certainly child sex traffickers who are advertising many times their children, the victims, on online classified sites or on the dark web in different areas. So it's very important, I believe, to understand what child sexual abuse material is, so we understand the revictimization that Nicole's going to be speaking about, and also the response. Because again, numbers can be overwhelming, numbers can be numbing. There are children behind all of these, there are things that we can do, and I think the first step is awareness and education. With all of these images, 650 million in images, in videos, first thing, most important thing we do is try to figure out where that image was produced. If it's new, if there appears to be, it was recently produced, where on earth did it happen? We work very closely with law enforcement here in the United States. We work very closely with Interpol. We work very closely, we have direct connections into over 140 countries with law enforcement agencies. So if there is an image that is found from a case here in Utah or anywhere else in the United States, we will make it available to the appropriate country, or the appropriate state, so they could then respond and hopefully take a child from an abusive situation that they may not have any other way to get out of. On that note, Nicole, I'll give you the clicker and let you begin speaking and sharing your story.
My story began when law enforcement notified me that my child's images had been found out of the United States. They literally called me in the middle of the workday and asked if they could come to my house. That's where I begin, because what happened to my child is not my story to tell, that is theirs. All I can talk about is the aftermath of the images being discovered and distributed around, and how we navigated that, and how as a mom, I tried to take care of my child and help them heal from all of the trauma, including the images. When they were discovered, I was actually relieved, because my child had been sexually abused for years, and there were images of all of it. And my first reaction was relief. Good, there are images, there are pictures. The person who did this, the perpetrator, is going to get caught. He can't talk his way out of this. There's evidence. And then as we navigated the next few years with the judicial process and the common justice, which didn't help as much as I thought it was, to be honest, I realized that the healing was there, but those images were going to be there forever. And that every time we found out that there were more images out there that were being viewed by people, my child was re-victimized all over again. I was glad for their existence, but after 2 years, after the court process, after the conviction, I thought it would be done and we would go on with our life, and that did not happen, because when you are the victim of a crime, especially a federal crime, you get a lovely notification letter every time something progresses with your case. And I didn't recognize the scope at the time, but I started getting letters. I'd get a letter when images were discovered. I'd get a letter when the court date was set. I'd get a letter when the court date was extended. Anytime something happened on a case, I would get a letter, and this was happening thousands of times. At one point, I didn't know what to do with them anymore. I thought I had to keep them all, and I had 2 wardrobe boxes. The big ones that you have when you move? I had 2 boxes full of those in my garage with letters. And that was 3 years into this. I had no idea what to do, and I was very lucky that people like Michelle and Lauren did know what to do, because I was able to get a lot of services for my child and myself in order to go through this. One of the biggest things that helped me was Team HOPE. And Team HOPE is a peer support group. We are all parents and family members of children who have been missing or exploited. 97 of us have received support from another parent who has gone through a similar situation. And as I was being mom, I wasn't taking care of Nicole. I was doing everything I needed for my child. And I said, I can't tell people this. I can't tell people what happened to my kid. This is their story to tell. And I was going through some paperwork, the mountains of paperwork, and I came across a flyer for Team HOPE, and I called, and I talked to a woman who understood every single thing that came out of my mouth. And all of a sudden it was like, I know how to help my child better because I can put my feelings into words. And that inspired me that day to say, I want to learn something from this, I want something positive to come from this, and I want to help other parents. And at the time, a decade ago, there was not the technology out there that we have now. The numbers were high, but they weren't as high. Things weren't as known as have established. So being able to be part of that group of people and talking to other parents and just letting them know from the very beginning, hey, we're out here and we can talk to you about what's going on, and you are not alone, and we can help you as a parent, as a caregiver, as a guardian, as a sibling, was just amazing. And last year we actually started a team called the Lived Experience Team, which is survivors of all of the case types that NCMEC handles, helping other adult survivors navigate it. So that's been a really inspiring thing, just survivors helping other survivors and letting them know that you're not alone out there, and we will help you with what you need help with. These are some of just the numbers, which numbers are kind of boring, let's be honest, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on them. But these are just the scope of people we helped. And one of the numbers that is not on here that really stands out to my heart is that since Team HOPE was formed in 1998, by 2 mothers who had missing children and met each other and realized that they could help each other and grew the program. We have helped over 90,000 individuals and supported them through having a missing or exploited child in their life that they care about. over 500 of them have become volunteers who, like me, said, I want to make somebody's life better. And I'm sorry, this is where I cry, because these people became our family. There's just this network of parents out there, and siblings and aunts and uncles and grandparents that say, we are here and we will help your family with whatever you need to do. I'm very blessed to lead the child exploitation team of Team Hope. I have amazing volunteers that work with me and support these families. And in the past 2 years, as those numbers were rising, especially with the pandemic, and kids who never would have been online before being stuck at home online, and parents like me who are technology challenged and didn't know all the evils out there, we've just seen a great influx, and all of my volunteers, despite what's been going on in their own life, have stepped up to help these parents. And I just want to recognize that, because it's a really hard thing to do. It can be very traumatic, and it's really hard on the children that we have in our life to know, to sometimes walk in on a conversation and hear about, us supporting another parent. It can be very triggering. So I just want to acknowledge, the team of people that stepped up to say, I want to be part of Team Hope because you helped me. And that's one thing too, is you might not be ready. You might have a child in your life and you need that support. I didn't get support for 2 years into the process. I was so focused on being a mom that I didn't think there was anything else I needed to do except take care of my child. And I called those 2 years later, and I was like, I really wish that I had looked at this fire 2 years ago. But we're here when they are, now or later. The other parts that Lauren's really going to talk about that help survivor families are just the things. I talked about the notifications before. After I had those 2 big boxes, I learned that there's actually attorneys out there that will handle those notifications for you. You can hand it off to them, and they're going to look at all those litter. They're going to have those, well, they have really good shredders, but they're going to have those boxes out there that you don't have to see that tangible reminder of all of the people who are viewing your images. And Michelle touched on this earlier. The people at NCMEC and the ICAC teams are some of the only people out there who are looking at it who really care about the children being depicted in those images. I mean, imagine the worst thing that has ever happened to you in your entire life being recorded and then sent around for people to see and view for their own pleasure over and over and over again. I know mine's not as traumatic as sexual abuse, but I would be mortified, and it would be very traumatizing. And so to have a child learn that other people are seeing these images and these videos and deriving pleasure, and then to learn that there's people like the CVIP team who are looking at them on purpose to save you is just amazing. My child was saved by the CVIP team. An analyst there was able to get enough identifying information in the images that they could send it to local law enforcement, who was then able to physically identify my child and remove them from the situation. But they offer mental health services. They offer so many things to help survivors and their families move forward from this that it takes the burden off me as a parent. I can be mom and I can take care of the child, and they can take on those burdens. I didn't know what to do to get her images down. I mean, if I had Googled child pornography, there would have been a red flag on a computer somewhere that would have caused me a whole bunch of different problems than I was facing. And I would have no idea where to start. And as I'm learning about the scope of it, I realized I'm just an average mom in average America. There's so many people out there who are in my seat and can't figure out how to do it. And so people, the people at NCMEC step up to do that, so I can focus on being the mom and make that my full-time job on top of the rest of life, and just heal my child to move forward and to take care of that. And that's the hope that got us through, is knowing that somebody else was stepping up to say, let me take this burden off your plate, and you focus on your family and we'll focus on the back end stuff. And there's so many wonderful programs out there that I really want to give Lauren some time to tell you about, just because, I mean, Team Hope is my heart, but we wouldn't be able to support parents if it weren't for the back end work that she's doing.
Before you start, can I just say, there's nothing average about you as a mom. You are a superhero and have done remarkable things, not only for your own family, but for so many families through Team Hope. So
thank you.
Nothing average about it.
I appreciate it, Nicole. I have to start off just by saying thank you. I feel like I've known you for probably a decade now, and no matter how many times I hear you speak, the insight that you bring, the new ways of helping me reframe what this issue is always ever present in there. So we can't do the work that we do without individuals like yourself being willing to share experiences, being willing to discuss what it was like to go through the process overall. And for us at NCMEC, the relationship that we have it's kind of a microcosm to the macro of the work that we do in general. We receive information from people all across the country, all day, every day, about tips of exploitation happening either online or in the real world. And that information comes from caregivers, from survivors like your child, from concerned citizens who don't necessarily know where else to turn to. And in that space, we really see ourselves as more than a tip line, more than a hotline. In reality, we're stewards. There's a responsibility that comes with the information that is shared with us. And we see ourselves as we have to do right by these survivors. We have to do right by these families and these caregivers. And for us, the way that we do that, before we can ever start talking about what responses are needed, it's what is our approach? And our approach is really rooted deeply in listening. We don't see ourselves as just give us information. It's let us meet you where you're at. What is going on in your world right now? And what are your concerns? What is happening to you? And what is going on immediately as well as long term? It's only by really taking the time to listen and to engage can we better start to understand the scope and the experiences that are kind of shaping and bringing people to us. It's more than just what we try to phrase is that you as a survivor, you as a caregiver are more than what happened to you. And what we try to do is shape our work to be able to kind of embody that approach. So one way that we do is we just have to find lots of opportunities to be able to show that we're listening. We've put out and gathered information on our website about why are people visiting us? Why are they seeking generalized information from our organization? And when we did that, we learned that for those who were visiting pages about child sexual abuse material, or what we sometimes, we were right close to Washington, D.C., so there's got to be an acronym, right? So we call it CSAM. But for those who visit those types of pages, 2/3 of those that were visiting were worried about their own imagery. That could be children, that could be young adults, years removed maybe from victimization, but still concerned that their imagery is circulating online. This can be adults decades removed from the abuse, but who remember that a camera was present, remember there were being threats made about, I'm gonna circulate this. We're talking about times that are sometimes pre-internet, but remembering digital photographs being created. And that burden carries a really significant weight, like Nicole was referencing. We know that when we kind of ask follow-up questions of, well, what is it that you're looking for? We're eager to be able to say, maybe you need mental health support, or maybe you need an attorney. Overwhelmingly, people respond, I need the images down. I need to know that they're not continuously circulating. So when we take that step back and say, let's meet people where there are, what are the most immediate concerns that they're dealing with in these moments, we can then better approach our responses. We listen when we take those tip lines in of reports from children themselves. And when we read that, and I'm going to share a couple with you, which can be difficult to read, but remember, this is what children are going through in these moments. We really start to better understand, see, hear the frame of mind that they're in. We see children essentially begging us for help, coming at it from oftentimes a place of fear. Fear that they don't know what's going to happen in their future, fear that their life is ruined, fear that they have no way out, fear that what's going to happen if and when their parents find out, the non-offending caregiver finds out, fear about law enforcement. Are they going to get in trouble for what occurred and what happened? Too often we see despair, we see dread, we see isolation, we see anxiety. we see suicidal ideation. And for us, we have to do more. We together, and those in this room and those online listening, we have to do right by these children. What we are hearing is hopelessness. So let's change it, right? Let's work to give back hope. Too often, I think we hear about messaging that is well-intended, but maybe not well executed. So if I say the phrases like, "Ugh, the internet, it's forever," sound familiar? Or I bet you could finish the phrase, "Once it's out there, it's always out there." And by doing so, I think we're trying to find a way of being able to put some prevention messaging in place. We're trying to be able to educate people to be careful about the imaging, be careful about the information that you're putting online. And yet, what we're doing is really reinforcing this information about, and if something happens, you're sunk. And if something happens, there's no way out. And we have to change that narrative, all of us together. I remember a mother who had called, and it's funny that you said that, Nicole, a little bit about the time and the intensity and how do I find these imagery. A mother had said, "I've been searching for over a year, working with companies to try to get my child's image taken down, and it feels like whack-a-mole. It feels like once I figure out where to go, I contact that company and they say, oh, that's not us, it's actually on a different server. And I go to the server, well, it's actually, you have to go to the registrar and a hosting provider. In terms that she says, I don't really know, I don't understand what this is. And so she reached out to us and said, I heard about a thing, I heard that maybe you all can help. And we got that image taken down within a day. And for her, she said, it felt like a full-time job for me, and I didn't know what to do. And that hit us because that is our full-time job. It's a resource so that what we can do and be there, not only for just child survivors, but for all victims who've not yet been identified. We are constantly working and sending notices to companies, to major internet platforms, to hosting providers, to registrars, to get the content taken down. And by doing so, what we actually do is start to trigger some of that legislative work that Michelle was talking about. Once a company becomes aware of child sexual exploitation material on their platform, they must make a report. So what we can do is try to make sure that we are both advocating on behalf of children, of survivors, of families, of caregivers, but also be able to make sure that this ecosystem is working in the right space. Now, it's difficult because when I talk about it's really important for us to be listening and for us to be able to be hearing, we have to start saying, okay, well, once we take that image, once we take that information, we now advocate together with survivors and with their families to figure out what are the next steps. And so we're really proud of some of this work that we've come up with. Our notice tracking program last year had some unfortunate but large-scale numbers. We had over 75,000 notices sent to companies, and on average, that information was taken down in under 2 days. That's just a team of really dogged and passionate analysts who care a lot about ensuring that that information, that material comes down. But we also work to gain the trust of those who are reporting information to us. And then by doing so, we can end up learning information about patterns and trends. One thing Michelle mentioned was sextortion. What we've seen over the past even few months, by being able to develop relationships with the individuals who are reporting to us, and they feel comfortable enough to share more information about what's going on, we're learning that there is this emerging increase of sextortion among teenage male boys who have been approached by a female online, oftentimes to start out with some complimentary chat or texting. It kind of maybe turns a little flirtatious, might turn a little sexualized, and then there may be a mutual exchange of imagery. But as soon as that male makes those imagery available, immediately it turns into extortion. The messages of, I'm going to ruin your life. I'm going to take this down. I'm going to tell your entire school. Here's a list of all of your friends and your family and all of the contact information that I have for them. I'm going to send this information out. If you don't pay me hundreds, thousands of dollars, I'm going to send a timer, and you better do this within 30 minutes. You can send it either electronically or you can get me a gift card. But what we see is this urgency, this panic, and really, what do I do next? And so our response and our approach has to be able to be saying, we're stewards with this information, we can get more messaging out, right? We can talk to individuals and say, from what we're learning, no amount of payment will satisfy that extortionist. They will continue to ask for more money. You make that first payment, it shows that this is a lucrative business model that's working, and they will continue to up that and increase that amount. Unfortunately, payment won't necessarily stop them from sharing and from sending over the images. We often learn that individuals, parents sometimes will say, okay, let's just shut down your account. Just shut down your account and then we'll just make sure it goes away. But that loses valuable technical information that sometimes the companies or law enforcement might need in order to be able to make an actual investigative case. So we're able to help get the word out and to say, whatever you don't delete the account, just block the user. Report that abuser. Report that individual to the company so they can start tracking and they can start making connections. Report it to NCMEC. Make sure that you're going to law enforcement proactively, because I think there's just a fear that those children who have said, I've engaged in this type of behavior and I'm gonna get in trouble, when in reality, that's the manipulation by that offender that's being done. So in so many of these times and like phrases, we have to start working on reframing, rechanging, and creating a new narrative around this issue type. I think it's important to think too as well that beyond just a case-by-case basis, we're really looking at a strategic approach. So I was so inspired hearing from the survivor panel that was on before us, because so much of it just rings true to how we want to be able to be connecting authentically with survivors at the start. So instead of saying, hey, here's a pamphlet or a brochure that we think, Nicole, that your family might benefit from, it's the idea of having caregivers and survivors help us craft it from the very beginning, asking them, what do they need? And then working from there. Hearing stories from survivors who are saying, the way that law enforcement approached me was really challenging and maybe caused more harm than it did good. And working to create trauma-informed policing. So we were actually inspired by survivors who had gathered together and started talking about and sharing what those commonalities of difficulties working with law enforcement, working with mental health practitioners. You saw Rebecca Bailey here, who has a wonderful insight, but not all counselors might understand the nuances of this crime type. So it's our role in our work to be able to take the information that survivors are giving us, being able to craft documentation together. We've created guides for law enforcement, guides for mental health practitioners, guides for private attorneys, to be able to get into space and talk about what are the unique issues about child sexual abuse material, what do survivors need from their responses. We host roundtables and have survivors and most professionals sit together and craft this documentation from a unified front and approach. And in doing so, we're actually trying to work on this systemic type of way of finding these gaps and then surgically starting to be able to address them. So I know a colleague here in the room earlier was asking questions from the medical community, and we hunted her down. You're on our list. Whether you like it or not, we're coming to find you, right? Because that trauma-informed approach is really important and critical. And it's how can everybody in what they do, how can we all contribute to making sure that we are the appropriate response for these survivors? When we think about it, we offer an awful lot of resources. And Nicole mentioned these. Not all these resources will be used by every single survivor, but we do have options that are there, whether it be from reviewing the images in order to be able to help locate a child, or the peer support she referenced previously, counseling referrals, where we actually have a network of, it's called our Family Advocacy Outreach Network, of trained mental health practitioners, trained by NCMEC, understand the issue, and then we can connect them up to those in need. Same thing goes for the attorney referrals, who will help take those massive quantities of notifications that are coming in and relieve the family of that burden. Take that on, advocate, and walk through that justice or that restitution process for them. Tracking the imagery that's online is something that we can do to help aid in the restitution processes and make sure that there's comprehensive documentation of who are all of the individuals who have possessed these images. We're also, we talked a little bit about notice tracking. We're also able to help work with safety audits for survivor advocates who want to come forward and say, I want to be able to speak out more proactively, but I'm nervous about what information of mine is out there online. And we can help work with them to say, knowing what your case information is public, knowing what you've put out there, could anyone locate or find you. That we hear from survivors an awful lot about this fear of being detected, this fear of being recognized in public, this fear of their world, of the exploitation and their current or their future world kind of coming together. And what we can do is be able to create these safety resources to make it feel more appropriate. Like Nicole mentioned, a lot of individuals come back around as volunteers, and another way that they can also find post-traumatic growth and give back to the space. And lastly, we work with survivors as consultants on these projects, working with us to be able to, again, review where these gaps are, and then as a national organization, be able to make sure that we're taking a really targeted and trauma-informed approach to everything that we're doing. So I'm hoping that gave a little bit of hope in terms of like the wah-wah of the issue, but I think we're a joy at cocktail parties, everyone in this room, I'm sure, when we all get started talking, right? People are like,
available for
back
birthdays.
away.
Yeah.
But I think the most important thing that maybe we kind of start talking is about, so what does this mean for you all? What does this mean for us, for all of us here that are in this room? And I know we've all heard a lot about listening, and that's good, and that's what you've been doing here today already. But I think another part is really starting to talk, right? Is really starting to feel empowered enough to be able to not let this issue stay in the taboo, in the secretive, in the burdensome, in the space that makes this feel like there's more re-victimization that occurs. Is being able to feel empowered enough in your own world to be able to advocate for this issue type, that we can all start to be able to kind of play a role, that we can intentionally, actively work to create a space for hope, for ensuring that we are holding the course for survivors, changing that narrative for them and helping them understand that they are more than what happened to them. They are more than a story. They are advocates for change. They are individuals who offer so much into this space and into this world, whether they choose to be able to speak out on this issue or not. But I think when we start talking about hope, it's about really some key facts. Images can come down. Survivors, caregivers are not alone. You know, we often talk, there's an army of support that's here for you. You just might not know about it. And that is the work that NCMEC does. So as I kind of wrap up and conclude, I think it's important to just kind of start thinking about, unfortunately, whether you like it or not, you're now a steward of this information too as well. So what are you all going to be able to do to make sure that you can do right by these survivors and right by these families?
Yeah, and to your point of you're not alone, like that is my experience every time over the years meeting an individual who was depicted in child sexual abuse material, particularly over the last 2 decades, who never met somebody else, who just felt so alone. And it was that gap that we recognized also, that bringing people together, like the offenders live, they want us to be quiet, they want us not to talk about these things, finding ways to empower, finding ways to connect, finding ways that people just don't feel so alone, because the reality is you are not alone. You were not alone. And when you finally met somebody else who had walked in your shoes, it took that off of you. And then you realized how important it was to give to somebody else. And in terms of like the private-public partnership, it is also really important to know, like, the tech companies, not all tech companies, but the big tech companies that we're working with are in this. They are taking information from us every single day. Not only can you please, this is a child, can you get that down? You may not realize you're hosting it, but they are proactively scanning their network for known child sexual abuse material to take it down. So it's action. It's not just passive, find it, report it. We really need a groundswell of continuing to take action.
And we talked about taking it down. I want to let you guys know, we've talked a lot about distribution today. We've talked a lot about known child sexual abuse material. The simple existence of a sexually exploited image of a child is abuse. It doesn't matter if one person has it and nobody else ever sees it, or it's been distributed 1,000,000 times. The fact that it exists is abuse, and just its existence. And we talk a lot about the distribution because that is how they get caught. Somebody who just keeps those images for themselves and doesn't ever share it, that the person who's the subject of the image, that child, is always wondering if it will ever be sent out. Maybe it wasn't now, But 10 years from now, is it going to pop up somewhere?
We only have a couple minutes, but we did want to take the opportunity just to see if there are any questions in the audience that we might be able to answer. I see two hands. I can't see faces, but I'm sure the gentleman with the mic can.
I really appreciate what you've been sending today or saying today. That was not a good choice of words. I think as a parent, I find one of the really difficult things as, having had kids go through their teenagers and have two that are in their teenagers right now, is that there are times where it doesn't matter how much you educate them on what is happening online and how they need to protect themselves and what they should be doing. There's still stuff that can happen. Yeah. And also even beyond just, you talked a lot about like the sexual predators online, or even on your graph of like who are the people that are just rating them. Maybe the self-produced or online comes into that, but there is also, I hear from my children and hear from other parents this lack of understanding. As much as you educate your kids, that boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever, sending between somebody that you know is also a form of exploitation, and that can go on to have a life larger than what is ever expected. So I don't know if that's just a question or a statement or asking for your comments on that.
Well, it's very much a truth.
Yes.
Because, kids, let's be honest, adults make bad decisions online too, right? And, you're dealing with children and teens with developing brains. Recognizing, I know for many years it was just don't take a picture, just don't put it out there, just don't do. We know that it happens. So I think the next step is making sure that you're in a space with, as a trusted adult, that everybody knows that there are steps that can be taken. Can't necessarily undo it, but we can certainly try to make it a whole lot better. And I think that sense of hope that Lauren was talking about is not what was there years ago, even 5, even 3 years ago. Yeah. I think that there's a way to get the content down. If you go to our website at missingkids.org, and you might know the specific link.
www.isyourexplicitcontentouthere is, I believe, what you're going to
There
reference.
you go. But we actually have step-by-step instructions, depending on the platform, on what it is you need to do to contact them. If you don't want to come through us, which is fine, we still want that information out there that any child, actually any adult, could probably look at that too, and know based on the platform who they need to contact, what they need to provide in order for them to take the content down. So again, it's kind of the aftermath piece of protection.
And what Michelle says too is it's also, when you think about that, that's also a very we're empowering victims to do it yourself. You don't need us to be able to do this. We're here as a resource if you want to, but we also want to make sure that people have the information that's out there to be able to take those first steps and try as well. So we're really trying to kind of combat this from a lot of different areas. And just for the record, if your kid took a photograph, you're not a bad parent, and they're not a bad kid. And I just think that sometimes we need to be okay saying that out there, because I think we've been really trying hard to make sure that this never happens, instead of looking at it and saying, okay, so it did, and now what? And making sure that it feels like there's steps that can kind of happen. So
I hear that constantly. We've had these conversations. How did it happen? I said, they're teenagers.
Yeah, kids, people. And there was just one more question I think I saw.
Well, you guys are on the right side of the spectrum when you think about scripturality. It says it's better to be drowned by a millstone. You ever seen one of those?
Yes.
Than it is to violate a child. So apply to you on that. When you talk about hope and you talk about change, there's quite a few lawmakers here today. And in our state legislature, we had House Bill 274. And I'd be interested in your opinion, and let me just kind of give you the nuance of that bill. It says it requires the State Board of Education to establish a curriculum requirement that includes instruction in sexual assault, resource strategies, and sexual violence and behavior prevention. And it amends our state code to say from the earliest get-go, kindergarten, it teaches kids that it's not okay for Uncle Freddie to put his arm around you and feel here and here and there. And it's not appropriate for on a date when you say no, and we all know this, that they continue in that type of behavior. This type of legislation seems to me it gives the greatest hope. And if we go state by state and we get that into state code, that we can go after those perpetrators, we can parents. And it's easy to add on there that we go after those that really keep it up, as you said, on the system, and they don't, kids aren't taught that they can be taken down. So I'd be interested in your opinion and speak to these legislators that are here.
Well, thank you very much. And your point of empowering is so important, for children to know what's acceptable and what's not. And that starts from a very young age. And unfortunately, not every child has, an adult that they can trust who can do that or teach them. In many cases, children are in homes where the people who should be teaching them are the ones who are hurting them. I cannot comment on a specific piece of legislation. We would be very happy to communicate with you afterwards, and we can trade information and connect on that. But certainly, I agree with you that it's critical at a very young age that children have the ownership, that children have the voice, and they recognize that again, we don't want to fearmonger, we don't want to scare, but we do have to prepare, and we have to inform them in an age-appropriate way. We do have safety resources on our website, free educational material, actually age-appropriate for children starting at the age of kindergarten, and in fun, dynamic ways, talking about online safety, but also, to your point, sir, talking about personal safety and your example about a family member who might get a little touchy. There are lessons about that, along with talking guides for parents and family members and guardians who can actually walk them through this material. Again, age appropriate, but giving them the lessons that they need. And would be very happy to connect with you on legislation, certainly. We have a terrific legislative arm at the National Center and are obviously very interested in ensuring that all spectrums of policy are designed to best protect children.
Can I just add, because Michelle said a thing that I realized that I didn't take the moment to express, but that every resource that the National Center offers is free of charge. Every single thing that we do is a resource that's available, and it's there when people are ready. So it's not a thing that, like you said, Nicole, 2 years later, 5 years later, we're here waiting for when people need us, whether they're ready for it or whether we learn of that information elsewhere. But 100% of the resources that we provide are free of charge to anyone in need. And so we just never want that to be kind of a limiting factor. So I just don't want to miss that opportunity
it's a nice way to
clarify
end.
and make sure. Yeah, free. Free is always a great way to end. Right?
So again, thank you so much for your time. We will obviously be here for the rest of the day, and my sincere appreciation to the Malouf Foundation, to Sam and Casey for allowing us to have this opportunity to speak with all of you, and to thank all of you for caring and for being here and for looking for creative ways that you can become involved in the solution. So thank you, and I look forward to the next panel, which I see standing on the side there.
Thank you, Michelle, Lauren, and Nicole for that, and the entire perspective that the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children brings to this conversation. We appreciate that. Now, before our next and final break, I wanted to tell you about one more resource. And this is a resource that we're very excited about. This has not yet been made public to the rest of the world out there. So you guys are kind of in on early access to this resource. It's called RAISE, and it's a free parenting resource to help parents navigate the challenges of today's digital landscape with their children and help them develop healthy relationships with their children. How many of you have children in the audience here? Raise your hand. How many of you have grandchildren? Okay, how many of you agree that the world that they are growing up in today is very different than the world you grew up in back in the day? Yeah? Okay, yeah, this is a challenge, and a lot of parents don't really have the parental or generational script that they need to be able to navigate that. And we want to support them and help them on that journey, provide a community of other parents that are on that same pathway, provide their ability to track and visualize improvements over time. So we focus on 5 different areas, and this was developed with a team of experts in law enforcement, early childhood development, psychology, neuroscience, and subject matter experts coming together to develop this really powerful resource that is now available very recently. And you can learn more about it upstairs, but there's also going to be a booklet in your bag as you leave that will have more information. You can go to joinraise.com to learn more. But we focus on 5 primary areas, and it's nurturing a parent-child relationship, navigating inappropriate content, confronting cyberbullying, protecting against online predators, and managing screen time balance. So those are areas that we all have questions about, like when should I give my child a smartphone? What is too much screen time? How do I protect my child against inappropriate content or predators online? So this is a great free resource for you guys to access and to give us early feedback for that resource. So thank you so much. Now we're going to take a quick 5-minute break because we're going to start our final session in just 5 minutes. Thank you so much.